while I get my PowerPoint presentation all pulled up and get us lined up and ready to go. So bear with me for just a moment. Okay, so once again, welcome. We're glad that you're able to join us for our PLC webinar for the cosmetology group. Today we'll be talking about math, and we appreciate everyone who shared examples and sample problems and vocabulary and all those resources with us in preparation for today's session. We'll be using some of those and talking about those, and we're hoping to have a really interactive session with a lot of good conversation and idea sharing and building off of some tips and strategies that Kathleen will share with us. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We'll start out doing some introductions, and what we'd like to hear from you is your name, your school, and what do you consider to be your student's biggest math challenge. It'll be interesting to see if there are any common themes that come up through that. And from there, we'll dive into the use of literacy strategies to support math understanding. Many of you, in particular, if you're part of the TAP program, have received training on various strategies, and we'll share and talk about some ideas of how to incorporate that into a math context. From there, we'll look at some multiple representations of data. What this involves is helping students think visually about math and data and taking information that they see in one form and translating it to another. The next section will be some problem-solving strategies, so some tips on how do you help a student who doesn't even know where to begin working on a word problem. What are some strategies that you can help them with? And then finally, if we are able to get to it, we'll talk about some math practices that are part of the Common Core math practices. Chances are we won't get a chance to get to that today, in which case we'll save that and address it on our April webinar. So why don't we begin then by just going around the virtual room here, and I'll unmute everyone one by one and ask you just to tell us your name and your school and what you consider to be your student's biggest math challenge. And while I'm doing that, if you are sharing a connection with a colleague, please type into the chat box the name or the question box the names of the folks who are with you today so we can make sure to keep track of attendance. So we'll go in alphabetic order, it looks like, by first name, and we'll start out with Amy Sassos. Good afternoon, Amy. I've unmuted your microphone. If you want to test it out. Amy? She might not have okay, I'm going to mute that temporarily. We'll come back to you, Amy. Let's go on to Bonnie Skinner. Good afternoon, Bonnie.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay. I'm Bonnie Skinner. I'm from Jefferson County Du Bois AVTS, a cosmetology instructor.
And do you have an idea of what you consider to be your student's biggest challenge related to math?
It's probably more with ratios, especially like with proportions with color. A lot of times they have a hard time simplifying the formulas, or doubling a formula, or, adding a different series in with the color. They have a hard time with the fractions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that and for joining us today. Let's go on to Christine Franklin. Good afternoon, Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Franklin from Cumberland Perry Tech. I basically would say just basic math, meaning basic simple addition, subtraction, percentages.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anyone with you today, or are you're there by yourself?
No, I'm by myself.
Okay, thank you. Glenn Isaac, do you have a microphone today? Glenn typed into the chat box, so I suspect he might not have a microphone. Glenn's from Eastern Westmoreland CTC, and he says understanding percentages is a challenge for his students. How about Julianne? Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Julianne Siskowski. I'm a cosmetology teacher here at the Lehigh Career and Technical Institute in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. And basically, the kids have a lot of trouble with math in general. They tell me they came to do cos because they don't want to do math. So I think our greatest challenge is just showing them how important math is to whatever it is that you're going to do with your career. At least the rudimentary business math. And they struggle with that, percentages and ratios and proportion and figuring out tax, sales tax, things like that. I mean, I have to break it down into really simplified steps, and they can get it. And then they understand the relevance, but sometimes it's difficult to get them there.
Sure. Thank you for that. And exactly to your point, just some of the life skills that you need to be able to take care of your own finances and whatnot are relevant there. So thank you for sharing that. Karen McGuire, good afternoon. I see Karen typed in that she and Michelle are there, and perhaps they don't have audio or microphone this afternoon. So if you'd like to share with us a challenge, please go ahead and type that in. And do we have, I'm looking at the chat box here while I'm going down the line. Kathy Estap, or Estap? And a little bit of feedback there, so I'll go ahead and remute Kathy. Kathy Houghton is joining us. Good afternoon, Kathy.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, hello again. A familiar voice. Kathy has been nice enough to sit in on all of our other sessions this week as well.
Okay, Kathy Houghton from Technical College High School, Penn Oxbridge campus, and I'm a math coach here.
Great, thank you. And would you please share your comment that you've shared on the other sessions about students, just comfort level with math?
Okay. Sure. I know one of the big problems that we have is that our students have, I guess math anxiety is the best way to describe it. They just hear the terminology math and they cringe and just don't want to do it. So we want to try and overcome that, that phobia, so to speak, and try and get them to be comfortable with the everyday math that we need to take care of business.
Great. Thanks, Kathy, and we're happy to have you with us again. How about Leatha? How are you today? Did you have anything you wanted to share? If you have a microphone available? Okay, if you have something, please go ahead and type it into the questions box. Mabel, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Here's some static, so I'll go ahead and mute. Next we have Mary Heim, who also has indicated she has no microphone, but that her student's biggest math challenge is with percentages. For example, commissions and sales tax. She writes, they do not know how to use the calculator and convert a percentage to a decimal to determine percentage. Great, thank you for sharing that. And Karen McGuire writes, their students have difficulties with basic math skills from fractions to measurements. Students seem to rely on technology when dealing with money. So that's an interesting observation. I think in one of our sessions, perhaps last year, we talked about what happens in the salon if the power goes out, not just from a services perspective, but also with the business perspective. So if the students can't use the cash register to calculate the sales tax and whatnot, how do they accommodate that? So that's sort of an interesting observation. Let's see. We will go to Melissa Chapman. Good afternoon, Melissa.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry, it's Melissa Chapman. I'm at York County School of Technology, and I have a guest with us. She's a graduate from our cosmetology program, and she went on to get her teaching degree in math. So she has cosmetology and a math background. And I find our biggest problem when the students come in, they're pretty shocked to find out that we're going to do math in cosmetology. And once you can relate it to the career area, they tend then to take it a little more seriously, but they do have the same struggles that I hear other people saying about doing the percentages. We have a school here that uses a technique called lattice math, and it's hard for me to help them because I don't understand it. And that's the biggest challenge I find, getting people from different school districts that are taught differently and trying to then help them to understand how to use the math formulas.
Interesting. That's great. Well, we're happy to have you, and welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us today. Michelle Werney, give you a chance to say hello. Michelle, I've unmuted your microphone. Thanks to those of you. I know some of you have typed in that you don't have microphones, and if I accidentally unmute you, please forgive me. I'm trying to look at that list at the same time. Let's try Michelle Allen. Good afternoon, Michelle Allen.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Hi, great, thank you.
I am from CIT, and I also have similar instances. It's basic math, even telling time, the clock, the regular analog clock. So I take it very basic and then show them how basic addition, subtraction, decimals, percentages relates to cosmetology. And I try not to overwhelm them with anything other than how it relates to cosmetology, and it seems to help and relax them a little bit and not be so intimidated with, you know, the fact that it's math.
Sure. Good example. Thank you for sharing that, and welcome to the webinar.
Sure.
Patricia Adams, good afternoon. Would you care to share any ideas, Patricia? Okay, maybe her microphone isn't working. Let's see, we have, where are we? Sandy Zulik. Good afternoon, Sandy. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's see, we have Sharon Dialing. Good afternoon, Sharon.
Hi.
Hi, welcome back. You were on our earlier session as well.
Yes. I'm here with Carol Knapp. She's our cosmetology teacher. Hello.
Hi, thanks for joining us.
We were having a discussion, and at first Carol brought up commission rates, especially graduated commission rates, because that's something really new for kids. You wouldn't have seen it anywhere else. And then we were talking about little basic things like counting money and reading a clock. But the other thing we're saying is, you know, we've taken away the opportunity as young children to do things like counting money. For instance, like when we were in school, we actually had lunch money we took to school. Kids don't handle lunch money anymore. It's all done by cards and everything else. So they've missed out on all that practice. Reading a clock, same way. We switched to digital so many places, knows how to read. So those are things that could come up even in cosmetology.
That's an interesting observation. Yes, thank you. That's a really good point, that some of that sort of real life experience they're not necessarily getting to prepare them for the math that they'll see in the classroom. So great. Well, thank you both for joining us this afternoon. Let's see. How about Siobhan Thompson? Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, great. Thanks for joining us. Did you have anything you'd like to share?
Right now we are working on our math with budgeting and cash management. So far it deals with a lot of percentage and fractions and earnings. You know, how would they promote themselves and allow them to stretch their ticket. So pretty much it's been fun, and they've been on target. So I really didn't have a problem with the math at this point.
Okay, thank you. And which center are you from?
I'm from Philadelphia School District.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us. Stacy Rudy. Good afternoon, Stacy.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm Stacy Rudy from Berks Career and Technology Center West Campus. And I would say probably at our school, a lot of the same things that other teachers are saying as well. We notice that they do struggle with the fractions. Counting change back, we actually have a cash drawer. We don't have them do it by computer, so they actually do have to count the change back, and sometimes they struggle with that. And also like figuring out commissions, pay rate, and so forth to know that they're actually getting paid the proper pay for their services.
Great, thank you. And finally, oh, sorry, not finally. We have a couple more folks on here. Stephen Beers, let's give you an opportunity. Stephen, I've unmuted you. Would you like to add anything? He did type in his name, so he might not have a microphone today. Tony Poper is also on with us. She does not have a microphone. And Tracy Scholl. Good afternoon, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Scholl. I'm from the Berks Career and Technology Center East Campus, and I'm finding the same thing as well. A lot of it is basic math, counting back the change to customers. Also, the fractions are a big problem as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us and for sharing that. Is there anyone who I didn't call on who would like to try out their microphone or share any additional comments? If so, please click on the hand icon and I'll be happy to unmute you. Amy. Go ahead, Amy. Do you want to give it a try?
Hi, Amy Sassis, Central Westmoreland Career and Technology Center. I find that basic math, telling time. Also, when we get into our income and personal finance unit, students don't understand how to write a check and keep a balance in a checkbook, and we try to help them understand that more. And learning about utility and rent, bills that they will have as a cosmetologist if they own their own salon.
Great. Those are great examples, Amy. Thank you for sharing. And we will check back in with you later with, we have an example of a lesson that Amy and her colleague use that we'll be taking a look at, a section of that in the context of some of our discussion today. So we appreciate that. Okay. Well, that's a great list of challenges, and hopefully what we'll be talking about today are some ways to address those and some strategies that you can use with your students and teach to your students to work on improving their math confidence and their math skills. So with that, I'll turn over the microphone to Kathleen McNally. She's our guest presenter today. She's with SREB, and she's probably a familiar voice to many of you who've attended the TAP workshops. In fact, why don't we just see a show of hands? If you could click on the raise your hand icon if you've attended any of the TAP math workshops, either this year or in a past year. See, 2 hands raised in this group. So great. Well, I hope that you'll learn a lot and have a great opportunity to share and discuss during the session today. And if you do have questions as we go along, we'll take a couple breaks for questions, but if you have comments or questions, please feel welcome to raise your hand or enter those into the question box. We will be monitoring those as we go. So I'll turn it over to you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Greetings, everyone. A super group around our virtual table. That's terrific. I thought it would be important to start our conversation. We have 3 main sets of tools and strategies to present, but before getting into those nuances, I wanted to reference the National Research Center, their research project several years ago. We mentioned it in a previous webinar about the work that was done and how helpful it is to look at the math that's embedded in CTE and how we can use that as an opportunity to strengthen students' understanding. So on the screen you see the 7 elements, they call them, for embedding math in CTE. And I thought it might be helpful to just, instead of, some folks really sort of jumped into the challenge and they had a formal effort of developing and using math-enhanced lessons. And some of those are out there on the national web. What I wanted to do was reference 3 main implications, big implications for those on the next slide of this work that I think set the stage for why we're going to present the ideas that we are. The first being the idea of bridging language and terminology. Through the work of the National Center, the teachers that were involved found out that it was really helpful for students to make the connection between the mathematics and math theory and how it works in CTE, the contextual, if we helped bridge the terminology and the language. So we're going to get into that a little bit with our tools. The second big implication is listed as the fact that students need an opportunity to see sort of side by side what's happening contextually, in a setting where they might be developing a business plan and they're creating a budget, and what the traditional math and the math processes are that are involved in that, and trying to look at both of those, and that helps them to make the connection. And the third is the idea that it seems to be really effective, and I think one of the webinar folks mentioned this in their introduction, that they felt like that students, to show the importance of it for their future, but also to kind of relax them a little bit by looking at what naturally is occurring in cosmetology. And so they found through this research that that's actually a very helpful thing for students to practice and develop their skills mathematically, but do it through the nuances and the context of their CTE world, and in this case, through the rich and exciting and fun world of cosmetology. So those are the 3 implications that are going to carry us into this next section. So we have 3 different areas. The first is, and I'm curious, perhaps, Jennifer, we can invite people to use the raising hand button and seeing if they've been involved, if they're a TAP center, which many of you are involved in the state TAP initiative, then you may or may not have had literacy training, either in the form of max teaching strategies or other literacy strategies. I'd be curious for folks to raise their hand if they have.
Sure. Can we ask you to click on the hand icon, and I'll just take a quick straw poll here. 2, 4. Well, it looks like well over half of the group, probably close to 3/4 of the group, have raised their hands. Kathleen?
Thank you. Terrific. So the next slide is going to get at where we're heading with this. The idea is, and you can show that, that'd be great. So it makes sense that mathematics acts like a language because it inherently has language properties to it. In fact, math is a way of making sense of things and communicating order and relationships. And so with that in mind, it really helps students to help bridge the gap in terms of language. So we would have like your technical language in cosmetology, and you folks could help me with that in terms of, I've heard folks say, 45 cut, the whole business world. And then on the math side, there might be concepts like perpendicular or proportions, and I heard you say that. That was great. And so ratios and those math concepts that really do apply and live naturally in cosmetology. So our goal with this first section is to really leverage what folks have in their toolboxes already from literacy training and present a couple example tools and strategies and see how you might creatively, and cosmetologists are very creative, which I love, like creatively use them to leverage math understanding. I think we have posed, Jennifer, a question. Let's see, the next, oh, sorry about that. We do have some great examples, compliments of Jennifer and you folks, about the technical vocabulary that you use and how it operates in cosmetology, like angle, for example, and apex and cutting line, but also has mathematical implications. And so our goal is to leverage these opportunities, to take these words, to take these ideas, and really ask students to do some more with them and explore them a little bit, which strengthens their math understanding as well as their technical understanding. And do we have another slide on those? We don't, but we have a question, Jennifer.
Sure. Thank you, Kathleen. So thank you again to those who shared those examples of vocabulary. There were many more that wouldn't fit on the slide. But what I wanted to share, and the question posed to the group, is that several instructors, when they were submitting their examples, indicated that they use composition books in class for students to record their math assignments and writing activities. And what I was curious to hear is, does anyone have any activities where they combine a math problem or a math scenario with a writing exercise? Is that something that you do currently, or do you have thoughts on any ways to do that? If you have something you'd like to share, a thought or a question or a comment, please go ahead and type it into the chat box or raise your hand. Looks like Kathy Houghton has her hand raised. Kathy, did you have something you'd like to share? Whoops, I'm trying to unmute you. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm unmuted. I'm good. Okay.
Yes, we're good.
Yeah, I went to one of Kathleen's math workshops, and in there we had done an exercise where we were doing like a math journal type thing, or a math discussion where questions were not necessarily by program, but they were just like a topic of conversations. And I created a spreadsheet for all the program teachers here that they could do this as a journaling exercise at the beginning of class. So, while the teachers are doing attendance or just, general housekeeping. And the questions are, something might just be something, how might math be used in gardening? Or, how do you think the principal uses math? And just questions that will get the children to start thinking about math in just everyday places.
Great. Thank you. That's a wonderful example. About, looks like Siobhan has her hand raised. Excuse me. Go ahead, please.
I know. Did they say something?
Siobhan, yes, Siobhan, did you have an example that you wanted to share?
Yes, we have Miss Stelly here and Miss Lori Martin. They also are cosmetology teachers.
Oh, fantastic.
Miss Stelly is our sophomore teacher, so she want to explain what she does with the class.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, welcome.
I'm always actually incorporating a math problem, word math problem. So what I usually do is take the lessons, for example, if we're working on manicuring, I'll turn it into like cells. I would create a math problem that they would actually have to do percentages and total price, and I always turn it into a word problem, so they would have to do reading and math combination, and usually they do a really good job.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really creative way to bring those two worlds together. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay. How about Michelle Werney has her hand raised. Michelle, would you like to share an idea? Michelle, we're not able to hear you. Could you check the settings on your microphone, please? Okay, unfortunately, we're not hearing you, so if you would like to type in a note into the question box, I'd be happy to read that. I apologize for the audio. Oh, she doesn't. Okay. And then I'll just share one additional comment. Kathleen Lietha has typed in that she does a retail research project, and she writes, the student is assigned a product, and they need to look up and define each ingredient. They also need to determine the price, wholesale and retail without tax and with tax. Then after the project is complete, they need to do a sale on the product with an oral report. Letha, how long do the students spend on this project? That sounds like quite an interesting project, and perhaps do you do it over the course of a semester or a quarter? If you could answer that. in the quarter one, she says. And we've had a request, Leatha, if you would be willing to share that project or share your materials for that. If you're able to do that, if you could email it to me, I'd be happy to post it on our SAS site. Yes, she will do that. Great. Thank you, everyone, for those great examples. And let me just take a quick look, see if anyone else has entered anything. Nope, it doesn't look like it. Do we have any other hands raised? Christine Franklin. Christine, did you have something you'd like to add?
Yes. Right now we're getting ready to write a business plan, and that requires a lot of math because I make them actually like figure out demographics around them, population, by age, by income, by marital status, and then obviously they have to do a 5-year projection on what they think they're going to make in order to present the business plan to the bank. So and that's obviously also going to include, you know, how many people are they hiring, how much are they expecting to pay, all the costs that are incorporated into starting up a business.
Great. And what, which year of students do you have do that project?
Juniors.
Juniors.
My juniors.
And is it over the course of a quarter or a semester?
I actually just gave it to them this week, and it will be due May 16th. So
okay.
March, April, you know, like 2 months.
Sure. And do they work on it in class as well, or is it all on their own time?
I designate every Friday to allow them to work on it, but I told them that they cannot count on every Friday to get it complete. They'll have to do a lot of research on the outside as well. And I'm also trying to get this year someone from SCORE, like from the Small Business Administration, to come in and actually talk to them more specifically about the business plans and what's expected from them.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we have one more comment. Kathy Houghton was typed in about a math project that she had students do 2 years ago, had math students do to identify how they use math in their program, and then they made a presentation in front of their class. They had to write a paper and do the presentation, and she writes that students often struggled with explaining the math process because sometimes they didn't feel like it was math. For example, calculating infant weights, I guess in early child care, angles in hair cutting, etc. So thanks everyone for sharing those examples. Turn it back over to you, Kathleen. Kathleen, do you have your microphone muted?
Hey there.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I was caught up in the excitement of all the examples. Forgive me. So I think it's a great lead-in that Kathy's last comment in the chat box about explaining the math process is that can be difficult for students and how we might leverage that. So this slide is to encourage this idea of journaling. And journaling can be different things to different people. And some folks think that they consider journaling like, you know, a traditional, you know, a teenager with a little book and writing about the angst of the world as you grow up, you know, and that's definitely journaling. But there's also other forms of journaling, like literally, you know, as the Philly Power Team was talking about, using word math problems and having them, you know, keep track of how they solve them. That's also a form of journaling. But I love the idea of really pressing students about explaining the math process, like the math behind it. So for every business plan that a cosmetology student would do, of thinking about showing their math, you know, their math sophistication, their math thinking behind that. So this slide shows from an SREB perspective, our organization really advocates that these big 6 strategies on the screen are what we're after in terms of having students write. So we could leverage these by having them write about the math that's involved in cosmetology and in their business scenarios and in their geometric design of hair cutting, but they could write about it, and that would encourage them to summarize and infer and predict and use vocabulary. And if Jennifer, if we had an example of a journal structure from Parkway West, I think out in western Pennsylvania, that we were going to show. Thank you. There, Parkway West Center and Technology Center. So this center took on the initiative of creating this formal structure, and I don't think we have anybody from that center, but the idea is that they're all designed with similar requirements as you see on the screen, and then the journals have different prompts, and so teachers, by area, can obviously customize their prompts. But some of them aren't, like this one, if you became a well-known celebrity, what would you do? Thank you. And then as you scroll down, you'll see that some of the prompts are obviously discipline specific, and some of them involve employability skills. So it might be neat, like to say, a customer walks in and demands this, and how do you handle it? Talk to us about how you would do that. Or somebody was not happy with what they had to pay for a service, and how would you explain or defend why the service is that much money? So it's a way to sort of, these are opportunities to include math thinking, but it's also through literacy, like journaling. Thank you. So that's an example of journaling, and there are others that I've seen out there that are just terrific. The next slide suggests that when you're considering journaling, there is power in what prompts or what sort of questions you pose to students to have them to write. And if you're involved currently with the TAP initiative, you might be involved in the current literacy work. And in the title, LDC stands for Literacy Design Collaborative, which is a national initiative that is involving folks across the country to get at addressing the Common Core state standards for technical literacy through the idea of connecting students' reading assignments and writing. And I wanted to challenge this group to take a look at the two differences in prompts. On the left side of the blue box is an LDC task that students are asked to write about, and on the right is a more traditional writing assignment. And to notice and see what you think or why you think there is a difference in, or if you do, a difference in rigor and complexity. So I just want to give folks a minute to look at that.
This is Jennifer. After you've had a chance to look at the example, if you have any thoughts or comments related to it, please feel welcome to raise your hand or type those into the question box. If you have a similar example that you'd like to share, please feel free to do that as well.
So while we're waiting, I was just going to, if this is Kathleen, I would just, reinforce this idea of looking at the nature of the writing task on the left and what it asks students to do. And I understand that this webinar is about math, and so you might be saying, well, this is a writing assignment. It certainly is. But it's also an opportunity to build in where students would have to include maybe mathematical thinking in terms of their procedures, or if they have to illustrate something, that can be very mathematical in their thinking. So I think it's an exciting way of bringing all the worlds together. Any thoughts from out there, Jennifer?
Taking a look, let's see. I do see, probably saw a hand raised there. Melissa Chapman has her hand raised. Melissa, I'll unmute your microphone. Go ahead, please.
When I look at the one on the right, I can see students begin to write, and they might go off in a lot of different directions. Sorry. But the one on the left is really specific, so it would narrow their thinking, but it looks like it would take a lot of time to do some research and prepare. It isn't something that can be done very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, exactly, exactly. Melissa is exactly right. And so, there are different opportunities for different usages. So on the right might be an awesome, kind of a quick prompt. It's sort of, because they're talking, the one on the right demands that students speak from their personal experience, right? they're not asked to research something, they're not asked to draw from a source, they're saying just describe how to do it. And so it's a lovely, I think, kind of a tighter, quicker opportunity to have them journal. The one on the left would definitely take more time. It would also, I think, the one on the left give a little more opportunity to bring in some higher level thinking, because they do have to bring in informational articles, etc. It's not just based on opinion. So, but both can be useful. Any others, or should we move on?
Let's see. Oh, Christine Franklin raised her hand. Christine, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say I propose a journal prompt every day. They have to write a journal every day, and I give the prompt, but I do have a lot of higher order thinking. And also what I do is I make sure that they have to write at least 7 words across and 20 lines down, because I noticed last year they tried to write 3 words going across the page and then maybe 5 lines down. So I really extended the words going across and the number of lines they have to write in order to promote, more deeper thinking.
Interesting. So you're giving them some specific parameters as to the amount of content. Okay.
Right. Like today might have been an example of you had a belligerent client and they were being belligerent to you, and then they started being, rude to the stylist next to you. How would you, as a client, handle this situation, watching this other belligerent client being rude to the stylist and the stylist next to them? Something random like that.
Sure.
Or something like you saw a stylist take money out of the drawer when it was supposed to be in the drawer. What would you do? How would you approach the stylist, and how would you tell your manager?
Very good. Thanks. That's a great example. It sounds like something that could come up on an interview as well. Stephen has written in that he uses operational writing. For example, walk me through mixing a color formula from beginning to end for a whole head. And he says it helps to anchor the processes. So, and just one quick response. Someone had requested or asked if this example if one of the previous examples would be on SAS. Yes, this entire set of slides, as well as the resources that we share today, will be posted to the SAS community site for our group. So you will have access to these following the session. Okay, Kathleen?
Yes, thank you. Okay, great ideas. I appreciate that, and great feedback. So on the next slide, we continue this journey of looking at literacy and how we can navigate that for numeracy. And I know this is just a little levity, but I wanted to give folks an opportunity to look at how young ones, like 6 years old, 5 and 6 years old, would describe how you cook a turkey. And I think there's another slide for a couple other kids. Yeah.
I'm surprised no one says it's ready when the smoke alarm goes off.
I know. Possibly they do. But now, I know it's a bit silly, but it makes a great point that Stephen had mentioned, this idea of operational writing, and I just applaud that. Hurrah. I think that's awesome. And so if we can think about tapping processes and procedures, and there's so many in the world of cosmetology, and cosmetologists are very creative people, and so could we rally and say, oh, there's some great procedures that we could have students write about, but we also want to include the math thinking behind it. So if they were going to, analyze somebody's like if they had to keep track of their customer base and how much they earned for a day and what the tips were, and they could have to take a sample of that maybe and write about analyzing that, and then the math part of it to say how might they, how could they inherently grow their profits for the day, like where did they see holes to do better. Or maybe there's some folks out there that can write in the chat box some examples of procedures that are very rich to have students have to write about. They could include some kind of math or technical understandings. That's the idea of cooking the turkey. So could we encourage that, Jennifer, as we move on?
Sure. We welcome you to type in any examples, and we'll monitor those, and perhaps at our next break we can share some of those.
Great. So the next idea behind the world of literacy for numeracy, and we'll just keep going, is this idea about word webbing. And this comes from a classic set of tools. In literacy worlds, you may see folks that use teachers that use word walls, putting up some of those really key vocabulary words that you know you're going to run into, and you see some lovely posters in different program areas that have definitions or show a different technique. Those are all terrific. It's really helpful for students to have visual understanding of the words of their trade. So this is an opportunity to think about creating a word web, which goes a step beyond word walls, in that it forces students or it encourages them to make connections between things. So I was thinking in the world of cosmetology, there are absolutely worlds and worlds of measurements that students need. They need to understand the worlds of measurement, and so, for example, you might have different, you could do one on money in terms of like their financial world, you could do one on products, etc. So I was curious too if folks have ideas about word webbing something to feel like they could put it in the chat box. There was an example that I saw I'd like to share quickly for a cosmetologist, a young cosmetologist just starting out in Vermont, in a school in Vermont, and we talked about this idea of word walls. And they had a word wall that had some of their classic, vocabulary in cosmetology. Well, she was working with us in mathematics, and she decided to create a word wall for numeracy. But she said to me, Kathleen, I didn't know, I wasn't that familiar with what big understandings or key terminology was involved from like she never thought about it. So she went out and Googled math and cosmetology, and she came up with like, I don't know, 6 or 7 big articles that were really juicy. And she gave them to her students, and her students worked through and came up with, I think 85 key terms that were math, but that were also cosmetology, like you showed at the very beginning. And they created their whole laboratory. Their areas where they're doing nails, their areas where they're doing massages, their hair cutting areas were all filled with these words all over the place. And so the goal is that they're going to take a few each week and focus on them and add to them like what they learn about them. And so you think about it. You think about measurements, and you think about, well, you could add units to that. So it's a way to bring in a classic approach to literacy terms, but do it through numeracy. And then I think we have one other literacy tool following. Yeah, this one's one of my favorites, and because it's really I think just a really strong tool in terms of understanding. It's a classic literacy tool called the Freyer model. I'd be curious if anybody out there uses it, and if they do, they could tell us how. And you'll notice that in the center, the design is that it gets at helping students to understand concepts better. So, for example, from the introductions, you could put in the middle. Ratios would work great for cosmetology. So you put that in the center, and then students, whether you do it in teams or individually, would be asked to have to fill in the different quadrants based on what it's asking for. So, for example, they would have to define in their own words what a ratio is, and then maybe characteristics of a ratio, meaning that it has 2 parts and you're always comparing 2 parts. An example, they might do certain hair colors and what the ratios of those hair colors are, or the coloring agents that you use. And then non-examples would be a something that they use that does not come in a ratio of, maybe neutralizer to something. So because of the fact that there's examples and non-examples involved, it really is a powerful way for students to explore different concepts. And the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics, this is absolutely an area we need to go. We need to ratchet it up and look at the concepts as well as procedures. So, for example, students may have trouble counting money. Like I heard a lot of that in the beginning, and it's absolutely true. I applaud folks for knowing that and watching that. So the concepts behind that are the idea of units and place value and how important it is that students really understand those. And so it might be helpful to think of tools, literacy tools, that would really focus them on the idea of something like units or base 10. Like our system of counting is base 10, and it's amazing that students because they have a very weak understanding of that, then it starts to be everything else is confusing. Like they don't even divide very well, or they're not handling money very well because they don't realize that it's all about the base 10 system and units. And so these tools can be used to really strengthen the concepts behind their difficulties. So Jennifer, did we see any comments from the literacy world before we move on?
We do have an example. I believe this would relate to the one of the previous topics. For the documenting the procedures. Any procedures involving NOCTI or State Board of Cosmetology exams. Some examples: comparing and contrasting different types of hair removal, chemical texturizing, costs for services, etc. Those were shared by Melissa Chapman. Does anyone else have thoughts or examples, or has anyone used this Freyer model and would like to share their experience with it? Are there any questions about how it could be used? Okay, we have one additional comment from Stephen Beers. He says, currently I use a really good resource from, I believe it's Cengage, a book called Making It Count, Math for the Beauty and Wellness Industry. It covers everything from mathematical basics, appointment planning and scheduling clients, inventory control, etc. And he shared with us the ISBN number. Thank you for that. We'll be sure to add that to our list of resources on our SAS website under the Math Integration Resources. Appreciate that. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised at the moment.
Okay, terrific. And that's a terrific resource, Making It Count. So terrific. Thank you, Stephen, and the others for their thoughts. From a literacy perspective, how we can leverage all those tools that are out there. So we encourage you to kind of keep on that and sort of experiment and see what we can, as a PLC community, what can we do in terms of leveraging math understanding through literacy. Then the slide that's up is going to introduce us to our second of 3 opportunities, a set of sort of strategies, understandings of looking at leveraging math understanding. And this one is called multiple representations. So this is an opportunity. This definitely comes from mathematics research that shows that students need to have an opportunity to transfer information, data, from different sources to different sources. It's been proven to be essential all the way through calculus, and can be useful anywhere students are in their math comfort. And I'm showing you a template that I share during the TAP workshops that I think are really helpful, called Rule of 4 of multiple representations, and it shows you 4 quadrants. And the idea is that students would be presented with data in one form, for example, a scenario written in words in the top left, and they would be challenged to take the scenario and create either a symbolic representation, a graph, or a table of the data that's represented without changing its value. Or they may be, so that's one way, or they may be provided a table of information and asked to, encouraged to take it to another direction. For example, from table to words, or graph to words, or graph to table. I encourage you to think about, if you're curious about what symbols mean in the top right, that from a mathematics standpoint, that tends to mean symbolic notation in math, like algebra. So for example, it might be that you're looking at different commission structures, like how are people paid, and students would have an opportunity to take a scenario about different ways of being paid, and they would have to say X is going to be my base salary, and Y would be what I make in addition, like overtime if they do that, or X is the hourly rate. That's what symbols means, is the idea of trying to generalize something by using symbolic notation, which is the whole rationale behind algebra, in order to try to look for generalizations. So this is a really, can be a very rich area to help students mathematically, and can be very fun, I think, for the world of cosmetology to find opportunities to mix and match. And I think we have some data representations that Jennifer and PLC members have shared. And so it'd be interesting to have folks sort of raise their hand or type in if you want. Jennifer, if we show the next several slides very kind of slowly and let them see if what comes to mind. Like if we stopped right on this one and said, okay, this is a great rich source of product use, and so it would be interesting to have somebody see if they have a suggestion on how could students take the information that's shown in this chart and how might they translate that to another form. That's the goal. So any ideas?
Does anyone have any thoughts on how you might take this information, use it, as Kathleen has suggested, as a tool to help students? The thing that I find particularly interesting about this chart is that it actually doesn't have any numbers on it, yet it is a sort of a mathematical chart with a lot of information on it. Would anyone care to brainstorm as to how they might take something like this and put it into use? Everyone's gotten very shy all of a sudden, Kathleen.
Well, we might show. That's funny. Well, at this time of the afternoon, I'm sure they're pretty beat, but because they're hard-working folks. But like, for example, and then maybe we show another one. What comes to mind immediately for me, it would be really fun, and I love your comment, Jennifer, about how there aren't numbers here, which is right, but this is still very mathematical because it's data that's presented in these, you know, in a way, a structured way, so students have to read it. They have to understand, okay, so what's across the top? Is that skin tone versus hair color? What is it actually saying? And so I think it'd be a great challenge question, either, you know, a beginning opener, do now, or a journal question, to have students have to write a scenario that actually fits this, that they'd have to use the information provided on the chart in order to create a story that would make sense. Like, I think that would be really, really fun. And that's actually mathematical for them to have to analyze data provided and make sense of it.
We did
so maybe there's another couple examples.
Sure. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yes, we did have a couple folks type in. One idea was using it with to calculate percentages. A second is to compare this to the pH scale and incorporate maybe two sources of information, thereby adding numbers and doing research. So bringing in, you know, another chart to compare this to, perhaps.
Oh, those are both fabulous ideas. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. They're totally on it. Yep. Others? Are there other data representations to follow?
I believe there's one or two additional ones. This one fits into the sort of the business plan idea that we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Projecting sales and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, these are great. These are great. These are great. And I think it's also, this whole world of visual representations is huge nowadays. I mean, people earn serious six figures in the industries of what's needed for visual representations. Like, I don't know if we can pull it up real quickly, and I think we showed it last time, Jennifer, but there's a resource out there, the 2012, there it is. And it's the, oh, no, it's the other one. There it is, the Nails Magazine Industry Statistics Report for 2011-2012. And if you look at the nature of this report, and of course it's beautifully done because folks in your industry, this discipline are all about that, and it's wonderful, is to see like what are the most effective ways to present and represent information. And in the world of cosmetology and related industries, that's really important. I mean, folks have said in their introductions, you know, we need to make sure that students know how important this is, and a lot of it focuses on business mathematics, but I also really advocate that there's a whole world out there about how, in a world bombarded with data, how we can encourage students to be data savvy, like they can, you know, they could project and create reports that are pleasing, but also are really effective for their, like their own businesses or their own services, so that, you know, when they're creating service sheets and they're, you know, is there a way to represent some of their client data, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to show that because it's, I just think it's a great example.
And this is on the, yes, thank you for bringing that up. This is on the SAS website if folks would like to access it and make use of it.
Super. So I think that that was kind of this, that was the second area, this idea of multiple representations. And I think it would be exciting if, as a PLC community, if folks experiment with that, if they'd be willing to share those, if they'd be willing to say, you know, this is what I did. I actually had a teacher just email me today from Forbes Road, who is trying a multiple representation, and it's very neat, and it's a little out of his comfort zone, and he is all over it, and it's exciting. And he said it was worth it. You know, it's one of those things you have to try it and say, was it worth the, you know, the extra time? And so I understand folks are very busy, so that's very exciting. So thank you for for the PLC audience to listen to that. The third area is this idea of problem-solving strategies, and I appreciate that some folks in their introduction, excuse me, were mentioning word problems, and I love that idea of word problems, those kind of life sticky situations. And most of us realize that any problem worth solving is not clean and neat and tidy. Like, not all information is provided, you know, when something goes wrong with our vehicle. You know, there's all sorts of unknowns. And so in order to meet the Common Core State Standards for Pennsylvania in mathematics, we have to present students with rich scenarios that are problems and really encourage them to jump in. And sometimes, as you and I both know, that in the world of, and cosmetology students are not unlike their peers in other CTE areas, is that sometimes they don't know how to start. They just get sort of befuddled by problems, or they don't have some techniques or tools to try out. And so this last section is a really interesting kind of just a classic collection of where to start strategies. And so we're going to show them to you, and then I really encourage the folks on our virtual group here to think about how you might use them in your world. So starting with guess and check, drawing a picture, looking for a pattern, as you see, list and charts, and then working backwards. And our goal is to identify ways in our projects and our assignments that we can build these in. Now, it sounds a little more simplified than it is, because I think that the strategies really for students to embrace them need to be modeled. So as teachers, we need to say, okay, I am willing to show students that this is an opportunity to kind of develop or look for a pattern, for example. Or I would show them in this scenario, I'm going to make a chart. And so I have a little bit of a description of each one, and then I encourage the virtual group here to think about how they might use any of them, and either chat to us or raise their hand, Jennifer, if you'll watch for them. The first one, guess and check. So there's a scenario on the screen. If I could, I think it's the second bullet. Yeah. And I'll let them read it. Okay. So the idea of guessing and checking is just what it says. It's to encourage students, if they don't know where to start, is to kind of read through it and say, okay, well, you're being asked how many rounds that this team win. So they may just say, well, let's just think that they won 10 rounds. So if they won 10 rounds, they have to look back in the problem and say, does it meet the criteria? So if they tied 3 and won 2 more than they lost, does that equal 25? And they'll plug in their 10 and see if it works, and then say, you know what, it was too much, or it was too little. And so from that, they kind of learn from their guess. So that's the idea of guessing and checking. And so there might be some interesting cosmetology situations that really lend themselves to guess and check. The next one is the idea of drawing a picture or making a model. And I just thought this was an interesting source, this idea of wig measurements, that how difficult would it be to present this information to customers or clients that need to understand how to take measurements without the pictures. So I think this is a great example of where pictures and models are absolutely killer. And I'm curious, like, I'd love to ask a technical question out to the virtual group, is like, do students, do they ever use a technique where they will draw a head model in order to plan a haircut, like a different, either an updo, like a very specialized, or I'm curious, maybe drawing pictures and making models of different cuts work. I don't know if that's something in the industry they use, but the idea of drawing a picture can be very powerful. The third problem-solving strategy that we had on the next slide is...
Oops, bear with me. Sorry, trying to advance. I was either too quick or too slow. There we go.
No, that's fine. Looking for a pattern. So now this one is not necessarily a cosmetology example, but I wanted them to get the idea of what the tool was about, so I'll let them read that. Yeah, so this idea of looking for a pattern. So this is a situation where the rate in the problem stays the same. So there might be a scenario in business cosmetology where the rate of a service stays the same. But there's a long scenario, and students have to look for a pattern to say, well, how much did how much did you net, or how much gross did you get? In this instance, they're trying to figure out how many days does it take for all the product reps to get together in Florida for their meeting. And we do have the answer in case you're curious. If you want to give this to students and see how they would work on it, the answer, I believe, follows, and I think is it 21 or 12? It's 12. 12 days it takes for them to get together. But this is an example of a scenario where there's a pattern involved. Like students can say, we go from 1 to 10 to 19 to 28, what's going on? For them to kind of feel that out. So that's a way for them to jumpstart into this problem. The next problem solving, we have 2 more, I think is the idea of using a chart. Yeah, and I thought this was a great example from Denise and Amy. Great. And this comes with this idea of a chart built in, right? So they have this schedule appointment book. I think it's fabulous. I'd love to hear, if we could, Jennifer, if they have chat capability about how they use it.
Sure. I believe that Amy's microphone was working. So Amy, I'm going to unmute your mic. And could you tell us a little bit about this lesson that you and Denise put together and how and when you use it? Go ahead, please.
Sure. Our students are put into groups of 2 or 3, and they are given some of our receipt entries and then also a scheduling book. And they call each other on the phone. We have pretend phones, and they call and they start scheduling appointments, and they mark off when they start each day and when they finish up, and we want them to do 2 different times that they would start and finish each day. And then they call each other and they make appointments and fill them in and mark off in between how much time they need to do each appointment. And then at the end of the day, they put in prices by those also. So then at the end of the day, they total up their daily money that they made, and then they figure out their 50% commission for the 2 days work in their salon.
See, I think that is so terrific. I thank you so much, Amy. I think it's so neat. It's so authentic and real. And you know, I was thinking about this idea too of like looking through your appointment challenge here, is that students could actually also look for patterns. Like they could look at behaviors in terms of if they had several appointments, like for weeks at a time, and they looked and said, isn't that interesting? You know, like on Wednesdays, we tend to have a very busy morning, for example. Like certain communities have certain, or maybe there's more of an evening population, you know, it's like a heavy working area or working traditional hours, and they get more clients there. I think there's also potential there, and then looking for opportunities to overlap so that while you're doing a service here, you're doing a service there. And so it's also looking for patterns. I just think it's such a rich thing you put together. It's super. Thank you so very much. Jennifer, other thoughts before I move on?
Yes, we did have a couple folks enter some ideas into the chat box, and I'm going to go back to that drawing because they're pertaining to that. So let me pull up the comments here. Okay, Sandy wrote that they do drawings in cutting class to create a new trend design. Christine wrote that they draw head forms for foil placements for highlighting techniques. Melissa wrote that they diagram each of the basic haircuts in natural fall and 90 degrees from the head. She says, our technical books for haircuts show diagrams like this, so students need to be able to read these charts. And Stephen writes that I make my students draw head model examples of their sets, including how it was set, what angles they used to create the bases necessary to achieve the end finished result. So it sounds like lots of great examples of using a model or a drawing.
Oh, absolutely. That is so, so neat. And hopefully we can capture some of that richness for folks that want to kind of, explore that area a little more, and we could cross-pollinate in this PLC, because that's the idea. It's just terrific. And it would be really cool to think about how students might draw from a pattern. So if they have multiple head models of sets, and they see the outcomes based on the decisions they made and the placement of things, like the placement of foils and what the outcome is, and the placement of foils and the outcome, and they start to see how that, how they can draw some, that's where they get, I think, that real intuition about how to do, make the right decisions up front about a look. And I just think that's fabulous that these folks go to that trouble. So thank you so much for that. So we have making a model, and we have that idea of looking for patterns, and it may not feel mathematical because there's not actual numbers. But for this one, like the next one, the book, the appointment book, but it's absolutely mathematical in terms of analyzing it and all that Amy and her colleague are asking them to do. And then I think we have an example of the next one. Yes. So this idea of making a list or chart, I think there's real opportunities there. I would encourage people to jump in the chat box about what in their world, in their curriculum, are some opportunities for students to say, if I chart this, I'm going to get this better. Like I'm going to be able to use this information to my advantage better. And then I think the last one will roll, and then we'll see what, and we'll put up the, yeah. So I have an example of working backwards. It's not cosmetology specific, but I'd love to invite people to look at it so they get the sense of the tool. Yes. So this scenario is asking students to contemplate at what time did Jack leave his original location. So this is one of those classic math scenarios that if you're asked to figure out when he left and what you know was when he arrived at the very end at 2:45, you have to work backwards. And that's what the remaining slides shows you, is that you take into all the consideration all the factors of the minutes he walked and so on and so forth. So it might be interesting to think about in the world of cosmetology, is there an idea of working backwards? Like potentially, is there a budgeting scenario that you could give and say that a bride has approached you and has a certain budget to have work done for her and their wedding party, and so kind of contemplating how would you work backwards and say, well, you absolutely need this part and this part, and what could you present them with some kind of combination scenarios of what they could afford based on their budget. That would be considered working backwards. And so I wanted to provide an opportunity to look at these 5 classic problem-solving strategies and think about how we as a teaching community can build these in as opportunities for students to practice. And I think at the very end here we have some problems. Do we have an example problem, Jennifer, on the next? Sorry, let me see. The next slide. Yeah, so these are great. So Mary, I think, contributed these. These are great. So I was curious, like from this idea of gross pay and tax deductions in this whole world, could there be some problem-solving strategies? For example, students may be hit with these bullets and may get kind of overwhelmed and think, oh, what do I do? Excuse me, I have a fur ball. Sorry about that. So I'm curious if the audience has any ideas of some problem-solving strategies, like how would you help students get started? Can we ask the crew?
Sure. Please raise your hand or type away if you have thoughts. And while you're pondering that, may I share a couple comments that have been entered by folks related to the bridal party scenario. Melissa writes, knowing what time the party needs to leave, what services, how to set the appointments is what she was thinking about related to that. And Sandy posed a question, what areas are addressed on the standards with this type of math? I'm not sure if Sandy, I don't think Sandy has microphone today, so Kathleen, does that question resonate with you, or do you need additional clarification on what she's asking?
No, I think it's a fabulous question, and I think I might do it justice. If not, I'm certainly willing to explore that with Sandy and the others. I love the bridal party idea, by the way. As Sandy's question is kind of what standards are addressed. So keep this in mind. So the problem-solving strategies that we were just talking about, and the multiple representations, and the literacy strategies are all procedure-based. They're all process type things. And so when you think about what standards these address, these align with and complement the part of the Common Core for Pennsylvania that's considered the math practices. There are two parts to the Common Core state standards for math, and one part is content, which is the number sense, algebra, geometry, modeling, and functions that are inherent for high school mathematics. And on the other flip side of that is a set of math practices, which we have information on to share, I think, hopefully at a later date. And those are what they call the habits of mind, or the practices that students, we want them to become sophisticated in. So it's more about the thinking processes of the mathematics. And so these are all connected to that area. So depending on what scenarios we give, content-wise, for example, we might provide an algebra example, or showing this like commission, this actually could be an algebra example. So the content would be algebra, but encouraging students to use these problem-solving strategies would be the math practices. The first one being how to solve problems and persevere, that kind of thing. So modeling is a big area, and using strategies to help model, like drawing pictures and whatnot, is modeling. So I think it's an excellent question, and hopefully that was I didn't muddy the waters. We'll see. Feel free to chat to me in the box and tell me, Kathleen, you're muddying the waters. Any other ideas, Jennifer?
Sure, let me go ahead. I think we maybe have, oh, I thought we had another example, but Melissa shared that she has, for a situation of helping students determine commissions, she's made up a detailed checklist of steps to follow, and then she weans them off the list by removing some of the steps each time. So it sounds like students repeat this exercise each time with less of the less items on the fewer items on the checklist. So it's an interesting approach to.
That's terrific. Actually, that's really building. That's actually a great strategy, whether it was purposeful or not, in terms of building perseverance, because students become more and more independent in their processing, which is kudos to you. That's great. Yep.
Sandy had a follow-up question. What areas would it address on the Keystone exams? Not sure if we know that quite yet. Kathleen, do you have any?
Yeah, that's also a very lovely question, and perhaps maybe that's the topic for a whole different webinar. I'm not trying to make light of it. It's just a little bit of a messy question, because I think the Keystones, to my knowledge, the questions are going to be are going to be targeting the inherent high school content areas. So it depends on the nature of the scenarios that you put together, whether they're algebraic, whether they involve geometry, etc. But I don't think there's a complete clarity around the Keystone questions. I could be wrong, and I would be happy to work with you to investigate that, because we were actually, Jennifer and the creators of this webinar series were hoping to include that as a focal point, and maybe even in April we can. I don't know. So I don't really have a clear answer for you, because I'm not sure everything's set yet, but I think it's a great question.
Right,
So
and I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, keep us in line with that. We would love to work with you on that.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, we did pose the question to our folks at the Bureau of CTE and some others to see if there was anyone who would be able to attend the webinars and talk about the Keystone exams. And our sense is that they're still trying to get a good understanding of what is going to be involved and what the implications will be as well. So we weren't able to get anyone lined up. I do see Sharon Dialing just typed in that the only math Keystone available right now is Algebra 1. some of the topics would be included, but many are not. So unfortunately, there's still probably a lot more questions out there than answers related to that at this point.
Yeah, but very helpful. Thank you so much. So yeah, and algebra is a big focal point, so you can't go wrong with looking at, and we have a couple resources at the end of the webinar, I think, that would really can help people as they explore what that means, the world of algebra. And so Jennifer, I turn it over to you in terms of if we want to head to resources next, or it's up to you in timing-wise.
Okay, sure. Looking at the clock, we have about 10 minutes remaining, so why don't I do just that, skip ahead to some websites that Kathleen has identified, and bear with me as I find that visual. Okay. Kathleen, would you like to comment on these websites?
Sure. I'll try to be succinct and quick because I just appreciate today being part of the virtual conversation. Thank you so much to everybody. Just a really fun group. The different resources that you see on the screen, the reason I had suggested them are that I think they're fairly sophisticated in terms of being very connected to the Common Core state standards. So you cannot go wrong in terms of if you're exploring the Pennsylvania Common Core and wanting to know more about the inherent math that's addressed through the Common Core. Excuse me, these two sites are in partnership with the authors of the Common Core, and so they are very connected. And they offer, both of them offer some insights into the content of the mathematics, and middle school, high school, the whole ball of wax. And so I think sometimes it's helpful as an instructor who may not be a math instructor to say, okay, if I want to create this scenario in a business plan for a cosmetologist to create a business plan, could I look and see what math that aligns to? And this is an opportunity to go to these sites and search through the content of the math, high school and middle school, and they have examples. And I think that's really rich to kind of say, okay, that gives me a sense of what they're after. And so I wanted to just, Jennifer had asked me if there were some that were more targeted than others, and I think these are two good ones. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Stephen typed in math.com is a site that he accesses. It's free and has great information on that as well. So we'll be sure to add that to our research, our resource listing rather, on the SAS website. Okay, I'd just like to take a couple minutes to talk about next steps, and as I'm doing that, if anyone has any closing thoughts or questions, please get those ready. Our final webinar for this year will be held April 23rd from 9:30 to 11 a.m. And the program for that, we're still developing it. It'll be somewhat of a summary or wrap-up of the information that we've covered over the course of our webinars this year, as well as some follow-up items potentially related to the math topics that we've talked about and some of the other topics of interest that you all indicated in the survey that you completed a couple of weeks ago. So we're working on developing the program for that. And if you are planning to pursue Act 48 credits for your participation, we remind you to complete a webinar response form and send that to us via email by next Tuesday, the 13th. Those forms, the blank forms, are available on the SAS community site, or if you're having trouble locating that, you can send us an email and we can forward it to you. So with that, why don't we just take one or two additional moments to see if anyone has follow-up questions or comments related to the information we've shared today. We've had a great conversation and really appreciate everyone who contributed both samples and examples as well as ideas and experiences. I think that's a really rich conversation and a great opportunity, and really one of the primary goals of our PLC is to start building the colleague interaction and sharing. Anyone? We'll just taking a quick look. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for your participation. We have enjoyed spending our afternoon with you, and great thank you to our math coaches who have attended. Several of them have attended all 3 sessions this week, so we really appreciate your time, and especially to our guest presenter, Kathleen McNally. Thank you for your time in putting together and gathering these examples and resources to share with us today. So thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon. We'll look forward to meeting with you in April.